My name is Kyle Bernard. I am an emergency room physician at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and I wanted to talk to you about physician engagement and electronic health records. I'll give you a brief history of electronic health record adoption in the United States. We'll talk about where we stand with electronic health records now. As a bit of a spoiler, it is not great. We'll talk about some of the issues and we'll talk about some of the solutions. So, to give you a brief idea of where this all started, early on, everyone was on paper records. And then in the 90s, you saw the adoption of the internet, local networks with the ability to share information across computers locally. And then you also saw the decreasing cost of computers. All this led to an increased call for electronic health records. And in 1997, the Institute of Medicine started releasing reports that culminated in 2000 in the report Two Errors Human, and in 2001, Crossing the Quality Chasm. These reports really focused on the quality of care in the United States, focused on a lot of shortcomings in that care, called out some systemic issues, and one of the solutions proposed in these reports was the adoption of electronic health records. However, there was no significant change because there was no significant incentive provided. In 2009, the Affordable Care Act came along. This is really well known for the individual mandate, for the changes in insurance, not being able to look at pre-existing conditions. But one of the more durable, long-lasting effects of it was the focus on value-based care, specifically thinking about accountable care organizations or other organizations that require quality metrics. When looking at these metrics, these are things that needed to be reported out. And if you're on paper records, these need to be recorded from the paper records into a database so that they can be aggregated and looked at across organizations. So that's a lot of work to go from paper to these databases. However, if you're on an electronic health record, it's already digitized and it's easier to report on. So how do you get all of these organizations onto electronic health records so you can move forward with these value-based care initiatives? That's where HITECH came in 2009. HITECH provided meaningful use criteria saying you need to be on an electronic health record that can do X, Y, and Z in order to receive increased reimbursement from CMS. And importantly, if you are not on it by a certain date, those incentives will turn into penalties. So how did that work? Once you started tying money to the adoption of electronic health records, you saw it go up drastically. And by 2014, when a lot of those penalties were kicking in, hospitals were largely adopting EHRs. So you see a drastic increase from in 2019, where it's less than 15% of hospitals, to over 95% by 2014. So EHRs came burling onto the scene, and what happened wasn't great for physicians. A lot of physicians feel very detached from the EHR. In this study from Stanford in 2018, you see that half of physicians say that it detracts from their clinical effectiveness. Nearly half say that EHRs just provide digital storage. It doesn't provide significant benefits when it comes to disease management, clinical decision support, patient engagement. This is a 2018 study looking at primary care doctors. However, these numbers don't change too much if you look at more recent studies or if you look at emergency physicians, hospitalists, surgeons, etc. The study also showed that nearly 74% of the physicians surveyed said that the EHR increased the number of hours worked on a daily basis, that it is contributing greatly to burnout. Nearly half said that it detracts from their professional satisfaction. Now, this graph is a little bit difficult to read, but the red bars show what physicians thought was really important, and the gray bars looked at how well these individual items were actually being met. The numbers on the right show the difference between these two. So the difference between what was being held as important and what was actually being met. So the things that were the biggest difference were EHRs were not able to adapt to user feedback. They did not provide an intuitive user experience. They did not provide a good patient to provider interaction. These are all really things that focus on the physician experience. And these are things that we'll kind of delve into deeper. So there's a lot of issues with usability in commercially available EHRs. So there's been a lot of studies looking at this, showing that they don't have adequate displays, that they neglect user-centered design principles. There's also a lot of studies looking at how much time we spend looking at the EHR and spending less time with patients. So one study in 2013 looked at emergency physicians, found that there were around 4,000 clicks on a 10-hour shift. All of this, like I said, provides increased time on computers, less time with patients, leads to decreased patient satisfaction. It's a major contributor to burnout. Now, this picture is not very rosy. I understand that, and it's something that, as you adopt technologies, there's something called the Gartner hype cycle. And we get these really high expectations for where we're going to be when we adopt technologies. And unfortunately, we're not always meeting those expectations, and you kind of fall into this trough of disillusionment. So unfortunately, I believe that is somewhere where we are right now, and hopefully we've bottomed out and we're starting to come up this slope of enlightenment as we continue to look at things and as new technology comes forward that might help us do things a little bit more efficiently. Now, looking at this a little bit more deeply, there's the study from 2019 where they were looking at outpatient physicians, and they showed that 49% of the time was focused on electronic health records and desk work. Working a lot of time in the nights, not even when you are in the room with the patients, you're spending a significant amount, about a third of your time on the EHR and not actually looking at the patient. And while that sounds horrible, there was also a 1973 study that showed that there was 45% of the time spent in indirect care of patients on desk work. So that 45% is not too far off from that 49%. And of course, in 1973, they were using paper records. That 4% difference isn't huge, and maybe that's the EHR, or maybe things got much better in the 80s and 90s, and then we made it that much worse by 2016 when they did that other study. So is it really all the EHR that is causing all of this burnout and all of this dismay? Or is there something else going on? So sometimes it's how you actually work in the system. This is a fantastic study from Harvard in 2022 where they looked at Epic, and they took all of the individuals, all of the notes in Epic, and they looked at how efficient physicians were with their documentation. And they ran some logistic regression on how physicians made their notes, how they created their notes. And they found 6 different user types. So there's people who just typed away on the keyboard and manually entered their notes. There's individuals who used copy and paste. There's individuals who used smart tools. Those are smart phrases or smart text or other forms of tools within the Epic system that let them get notes a little bit quicker, a little bit more efficiently. And then there's transcription. So people who used tools such as Dragon. And if you look at these middle bar charts, you'll see that the individuals who used the transcription services spent about 10 minutes less per note per patient. That 10 minutes is quite a bit, but it's even more when you look at how much time these individuals spent in the electronic health record overall per patient. So individuals who are efficient in notes are even more efficient elsewhere in the system. So they spent about 10 minutes or 20 minutes less in the electronic medical record overall per patient if you are using transcription versus if you're using manual entry. So 10% or 10 minutes are in notes, but then there's another 10 minutes elsewhere, reviewing the chart, placing orders, etc. You're just that much more efficient if you're documenting well. You're also spending less time outside of scheduled hours. So all this to say that how you actually work in the system matters, and it's some individuals use the system differently. Similarly, if you're more apt to personalization, you're going to have a much better experience. So this slide looks at the percent of personalization settings on an organizational average and how satisfied they are. So the more personalization that you do, the more satisfied you are. Now, that kind of falls onto the organization. So they need to teach you, someone needs to teach you how to do that personalization. And this slide shows that individuals who strongly agree that the initial training prepared them well were much more satisfied than individuals who disagreed with that statement. After less than 12 months, individuals who had good training initially were very satisfied with the system compared to those who felt that the initial training was not great. But what's important here is that after 5 years, that still held true. So initial training from your health system is crucial to end user satisfaction. And this slide is one of my favorites. It's from a class study, which is an organization that looks at best practices in healthcare information technology. It's a 2021 study looking at the percent of providers who agree that the electronic health record enables quality care. And what's crucial here is that you see that there's a broad range of responses, that some organizations are great at providing quality care with their EHR, and some organizations are abysmal at it. However, the electronic health record at some of the organizations that are great are the same electronic health records that are horrible at other organizations. So it's not the EHR, it's something about the organizations and the way in which they implement the EHR. So it's crucial as a physician that we start making the organizations take ownership, that we demand good training and ongoing engagement. We need the organizations to listen to us. This is a review study that really delved into the issue where physicians felt that they were most listened to, where they had the best engagement strategies, where they had the highest satisfaction. And it found that ongoing engagement with users is essential and that they need to have tailored training to support you. This is another study from class that showed that looking at highly satisfied users and some of the characteristics of highly satisfied users. So a highly satisfied user is someone who agreed or strongly agreed that the EHR enabled delivery of high quality care and that the EHR makes them efficient. And they tend to have higher experiences with the EHR, which seems logical. Importantly, they felt that individuals who said that they had strong training initially were much more likely to be high satisfied users. So an average user had a score of 1, and highly satisfied users were 3.8 times more likely to agree. Similarly, they felt that the EHR implementation went very well. So both of these things point to the fact that initial training and initial implementation are crucial for ongoing satisfaction from users and being able to use the EHR. Similarly, they also were more likely to be personalizing the EHR to meet their needs and to become highly satisfied users. Additionally, from a more of an individual perspective, highly satisfied users said that they needed to take some personal initiative and felt that it fell onto them to personalize the system. So while it is helpful to say that organizations need to help us become successful, there is some individual ownership where you need to put in some effort to personalize the system yourself and spend some time becoming more efficient. If you think back to that Harvard study, creating some of those tools, becoming adept at using dictation, while it may require some front-end work from yourself, if you're saving 10 minutes per patient by being efficient, it makes a substantial difference. Now, this is the most important slide, I think, and one of my favorite slides in all of clinical informatics. This is a study from 2018 where they looked at the number of characters in an outpatient note. And all of those light green bars are the average number of characters in a note for various organizations in the United States. And on the far left, you see the international customers. These are all Epic customers. And those are the international organizations. And it just shows you that the amount of regulations in the United States is so onerous that the notes have become so long and such a burden to documentation to us that we have to just spend so much time on this documentation. There's a clear difference between the US and other organizations and other countries. Healthcare, the provision of care that you're actually doing at the bedside is not that much different, but it's the amount of time that we have to spend dealing with all of these different issues. It's not, Epic is largely the same from an organization in the United States to one of their international customers. It's not the EHR. You're still treating patients with medicines that are similar. There's not much difference there other than the regulations. So I really appreciate the call to action in this report where they talk about how many individuals blame vendors, they blame Epic, but some of that's just an old man shaking his fist at the clouds in the sky because hospitals demanded these various features that the EHRs have implemented. And while those features may not be the best with regards to usability, it's something that they needed in order to meet all of the demands that we previously talked about from a meaningful use perspective from the value-based care initiatives. And while those initiatives are great, in theory, a lot of the regulations have increased the amount of time we spend documenting. And at some point, we, as a group of physicians, need to start advocating for ourselves to make these regulations more common sense. So that is me getting off my soapbox. Thank you all for listening.